Once, not so long ago, but a very long time before you heard this little story, a quiet, thoughtful, inventive man with his two best friends that happened to be a faithful horse named Mr. Oats and a beautiful dog named Nita happened upon a country mountainside of peaceful forests, beautiful waterfalls, birds of every color with song-like melodies sifting through lace-green canopies of trees, scurrying chipmunks, squirrels carrying acorns to and fro, red fox whose lustrous fur glistened like embers of silken threads in sunbeams, raccoons wearing their little masks, deer in summer orange coats, and more and more and more. And the earth was soft. On the forest floor, as Mr. Bramble and his two best friends breathed apple scent and thimbleberry blossoms, and their eyes smiled at the turquoise skies above and beyond the majestic trees of oak and maple and cherrywood and others. In this glorious moment of sights and sounds and scents and thoughts, Mr. Bramble quietly, thoughtfully, and inventively found himself in a place he knew he wished to be his home. He looked at his two best friends. Mr. Oats was munching on a soft mountain ash limb. Beautiful Nita sat near with a yellow butterfly settling on her soft white fur. Yes, quiet, thoughtful Mr. Brambles nodded. This will be our home. Mr. Brambles traveled lightly. He held all of his belongings in his worn knapsack on a sturdy stick. He filled his pockets with treats for Mr. Oats and Nita. Mr. Brambles was quiet, thoughtful, inventive, and solitary because he truly liked quiet, so he could hear the songs of birds, calls of fox, clouds bumping together, soft rain and snow landing. And he liked being thoughtful because ideas became things he could build or write or say. And he liked being inventive because his hands could make amazing things his quiet thoughts imagined to invent. And today, Mr. Bramble's quiet thoughts invented his little log house in this great forest of birds and animals and trees and butterflies and waterfalls under a wide open sky where no one had ever thought to build a little home and happily live. And that is exactly, precisely, certainly, definitely, truly what Mr. Bramble did. He built a home of cherry wood with a little roof of slate. He built a fence with a shelter for Mr. Oats. He made trails and paths and little bridges to thimbleberry wilds and green spicy leeks and mushroom patches, and he made maple syrup from sugar trees. And if a pheasant happened by, he'd feast on the forest game. Living in the forest in his little house with fresh spring water and wide sky heavens, with Mr. Oats and beautiful Nita was the happiest, peaceful, beautiful, plentiful life. Deer became his friends. Mr. Bramble smiled every day because he was happy in the mountain he found and made home. One day, a deer beckoned Mr. Bramble and beautiful Nita to follow a ridge that Mr. Bramble had never explored. The deer stood totally still next to the secret of the serenity and beauty of the mountain's peace and serenity. A red-tailed hawk sat high up on this most unique and majestic tree that caused Mr. Bramble's eyes to study carefully, quietly, and thoughtfully. In all the forests that he had ever been. This tree was solitary, like Mr. Bramble, and quietly magnificent. Mr. Bramble knew that he was looking at 100 years or more living Native American trail tree. He knew from its gnarled limbs and stature that a great Indian chief had passed along this ridge and rested beneath this tree. The wide curve of the silver blue river below the ridge held fish and canoes once, and the Indian tree showed traveling tribes how to find it. In a moment of setting his eyes upon this gift from people hundreds of years past, Mr. Bramble looked in awe and raised his eyes to the leafy branches and soft winds that swayed gently, and he said quietly and thoughtfully and inventively, "Others, once, and great ones, were on this mountain forest." And he hugged Nita, who held up her paw for a treat. The end.